Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Cannabis Oversight Commission meeting. I'm going to begin with calling the roll. Senator Lucas. Here. Senator McDougall. Senator McPike. Here. Delegate Adams. Here. Delegate Campbell. Here. Delegate Krizak.
Here.
Delegate Moorfield. Delegate Scott.
Here.
Delegate Herring.
Here.
Senator Eben. Here. All right, we have a quorum, so I'm going to open up the floor for nominations of chair.
I have a nomination.
Delegate Krizak.
I would like to nominate Senator Adam Eben to be the chair.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the chair is Senator Eben. I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Lindley. And our next order of business would be to elect a vice chair. Are there nominations?
I have a nomination.
Yes, Senator Lucas.
I'd like to nominate Majority Leader Charnel Herring.
Second.
Okay. And seconded by Delegate Krizak. All in favor of Delegate Herring to be our vice chair, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Congratulations, Madam Vice Chair.
Congratulations, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all for being here today. Thank you particularly to the members of the commission, and congratulations, Vice Chair Herring. The purpose of this commission is to oversee the implementation of cannabis legalization, collect public input, and make policy recommendations where applicable, and review proposed regulations by the newly formed Cannabis Control Authority. We will begin that work today, understanding that we're on a distinct timeline. I think it's fairly well known, of course, that simple possession of marijuana for individual use became legal on July 1st. And according to the original legislation passed by the General Assembly this year, the Cannabis Control Authority must promulgate regulations for legal adult use market by July 1st, 2023, before which they must present them to this commission for review. And that legal sales as of now, if the legislation is reenacted, would begin on January 1st, 2024. And of course, this commission would be dissolved that same year. That gives us limited time to tackle the many facets of this complex policy change, including the standing up of a new state agency, the creation and regulation of a market, and more work on our criminal justice system. At the outset to this journey towards legalization, the governor, Senator Lucas, Delegate Herring, and I stated our guiding principles for what a just legalization of cannabis would look like, and they're the same principles which I ask that this commission consider in its work. Those four principles are social, racial, and economic equity, public health, protections for young people, and diligent data collection and review. We have a unique opportunity and great responsibility to repair some of the harms of the failed prohibition, invest in those communities who for generations were targeted and disproportionately damaged by that failed policy, and build an industry which can be the impetus for generational wealth for many Virginians. Working with the administration, the Cannabis Control Authority, and the public, we can do this responsibly, and it is my hope in an expedient and quick manner. The members of the commission should all have in front of you an agenda for today, but I will remind the public this is just our first meeting, and that some topics will require more data collection and research before we can make recommendations and are open to be addressed at future meetings. Why don't we start by having members of the commission introduce themselves and their districts. Delegate Campbell, did you want to start?
Delegate Jeff Campbell, representing the 6th District, which is comprised of Carroll County, Wythe County, and part of Smith County.
Good afternoon, Delegate Scott, House District 80, Portsmouth, Virginia.
Delegate Paul Krizak, representing the 44th District. That's the Mount Vernon and Lee section of Fairfax County.
I'm Senator Adam Eben again, and I represent the 30th Senate District, including parts of Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax, and I have the honor of sharing territory with both Delegate Krizak and with Delegate Herring.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Charnel Herring, 46th House District, all contained in the city of Alexandria.
Good afternoon. I'm Delegate Donna Adams. I represent the 68th District, which is parts of Richmond City, Northern Chesterfield, and Henrico County.
I'm Louise Lucas, and I represent the 18th Senatorial District, and it includes all a part of Portsmouth, Chesapeake, Suffolk, Franklin, Southampton County, Isle of Wight County, Greenville County, Sussex, Surrey, and of course, there are a couple more.
Did you get it all?
Not quite.
All right. Jeremy McPike, State Senator from the 29th Senate District, representing parts of Prince William, Manassas City, and Manassas Park City. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. And also, we have two members of the commission who are not able to join us for this, our first meeting, Delegate Will Moorfield and Senator Ryan McDougall, who we'll look forward to seeing at our future meetings. The first order of business is to report on the administration's actions and progress thus far with the Cannabis Control Authority. And is Megan Field from the administration's here? Ms. Field, thank you for all the work that you've done on getting us to this point in crafting the legislation and the hard work since, and we'll look forward to your report.
Hi, good afternoon. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation to share some of the work the administration's been doing since this law was enacted. My name is Megan Field, and I'm a policy advisor to Governor Northam on public safety and agriculture, which includes the overlap of cannabis. Unfortunately, Secretary Moran had a pressing personal matter, so he's not able to join us today. But Deputy Secretary J.K. Davenport is here to represent the Secretary of Public Safety. The administration's tremendously proud of SB 1406 and HB 2312 and grateful for the leadership of the bill's lead patrons, Leader Herring, Senators Eben and Senator Lucas, as well as the diligent work of other members of the Oversight Commission who worked tirelessly during the past General Assembly session to legalize cannabis in Virginia. Thanks to your leadership, Virginia is not only the first state in the South to legalize adult use cannabis, it's doing so the right way. We took the time in 2020 to learn from JLARC, from other states, from experts, and from Virginians throughout the Commonwealth. This resulted in 2 reports, one from JLARC, which included a bevy of useful data points, and I'm so glad that JLARC is here today to share as well, and a second report authored by the governor's team, which was stakeholder-driven. These 2 reports ensured that this legislation includes strong public health and safety guardrails, progressive social equity mechanisms and goals, and sufficient time to successfully get to legal sales. As you all know, we're only 6 weeks into a multi-year process, including the requirement that the licensing provisions of the bill be reenacted next year. But the law is already making a positive impact on Virginians' lives. As of July 1, Virginians 21 and over may possess up to an ounce of marijuana for personal use. Last year, during decriminalization, over 6,000 fines were given to Virginians for simply possessing marijuana. Data shows that, like arrest rates, these civil infractions were given out disproportionately to Black Virginians, despite evidence that Black and white Virginians use marijuana at similar rates. Legalization means that adults in our state will no longer face penalties or interactions with law enforcement officers for making the personal choice to use cannabis, and it helps to prevent the disparate impact of drug enforcement on communities of color. Additionally, in July, the Virginia State Police sealed from public view over 64,000 misdemeanor possession with intent to distribute, arrest, and conviction records in its database. This follows the sealing of simple possession records that occurred in 2020. Thanks to Leader Herring and Senator Surville's legislation and Governor Northam's inclusion of funding in the fiscal year 22 budget, Virginia is on the path to sealing and expunging records from not only the state police's system, but also from other law enforcement, court, and private databases. That more comprehensive sealing will take several years to allow state agencies to update outdated systems. After those updates are made, sealing or expunging records will be a much quicker process. In the meantime, this is an important first step toward removing barriers to employment, housing, and education for Virginians. The administration has also begun to work on public health and safety initiatives funded by this year's General Assembly. Virginia State Police have already begun training drug recognition experts, or law enforcement officials certified on how to recognize drugged driving. 15 officers from the state police, Alexandria, Radford, Virginia Beach, and other localities graduated from the program this month. and state police believe we can have 80 officers trained by next summer. Additionally, the Secretary of Health and Human Resources team is in the process of developing a public awareness campaign with a special focus on young people. Along these lines, the administration has been working to ensure that the public understands what changes occurred on July 1. This summer, we made cannabis.virginia.gov live. Once again, that's cannabis.virginia.gov, G-O-V. On this website, Virginians can find answers to commonly asked questions, read updates on the Commonwealth's work on cannabis legalization, and find ways to be in touch with their officials. And speaking of officials, this July, the governor was proud to announce his appointment to 3 cannabis boards. The governor appointed 5 individuals to join the 20-member Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board. The governor appointed Mr. Amari Harris, who leads the Virginia Indigent Defense Commission's equity, diversity, and inclusion work, as well as 4 citizen leaders who serve their communities tirelessly. Mr. Jorge Figueredo of Falls Church, Mr. W. Anthony West of Roanoke, Ms. Sheba Williams of Richmond, Ms. Vicki Williams Collins of Hampton. Dr. Janice Underwood, the governor's chief diversity officer, chairs this board, and her team is already working with board members to prepare for the work ahead. It's predicted that this board will have between $7.8 and $12.9 million in the first year of legal sales, and between $38.4 and $63.9 million in the 5th year of legal sales. That money will go to support communities that have been historically underinvested in and that have experienced disproportionate enforcement of drug laws. The governor also made appointments to the 21-person Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council. Ms. Nigista Bibi of Richmond, Professor Larry Keene II of Petersburg, Dr. Cynthia Morrow of Roanoke, and Mr. Margus Treber of Leesburg. Each of these individuals brings expertise in public health, substance abuse, or the cannabis industry. They join fellow experts who will serve as advisors to the Cannabis Control Authority's Board of Directors. The governor's Secretary of Health and Human Resources, Dr. Daniel Carey, chairs this board, and his team is similarly already working to bring these specialists together. As the Commonwealth works to stand up a commercial market, this board is required to approve any health-related regulations. Virginia is truly leading the way on ensuring that cannabis legalization is informed by public health expertise. Lastly, the governor made appointments to the 5-member Virginia Cannabis Control Authority Board of Directors. This is the board that will lead the new state authority responsible for the adult use marketplace. The board's chair, Mr. Neil Amen, CEO of Shaman Hotels, is a Henrico resident with significant experience in business and a long-standing track record of public service. Mr. Michael Massey, an accomplished trial attorney and community leader, will serve as the board's vice chair. Ms. Betty Brand of Roanoke, Ms. Rashida Creedon of Richmond, and Mr. Shane Emmett of Midlothian round out the board, bringing experience in agriculture, the law, emerging markets, public service, and social equity to this important board. As you're aware, the Cannabis Control Authority, or the CCA, falls under the Secretariat of Public Safety and Homeland Security. And I'm working closely with Secretary Moran's team to begin setting up the infrastructure for the new authority. We recently met with the Board of Directors Chair and Vice Chair to get acquainted and to orient them to the marijuana legalization. Cannabis, needless to say, is a rapidly changing industry, governed by a uniquely complex legal and regulatory system. In the early weeks of its existence, the board is working to ensure that it understands this complicated landscape. The Cannabis Control Authority has been given a challenging task. It has 2.5 years to stand up a brand new state authority, to draft regulations and issue business licenses, to implement ambitious social equity, public health, and safety goals. Similar to ABC, the responsibility for these tasks rests mainly with the CCA's Board of Directors, who will coordinate with the executive branch and will build a workforce to help it accomplish these goals. The creation of an entirely new state entity comes with rare opportunities. For example, the Virginia's Cannabis Control Act creates a leadership position within the CCA for a social equity liaison who will ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion get built into the very foundations of the authority. She will also lead the statutorily created Cannabis Business Equity and Diversity Support Team, who will provide research and outreach to social equity qualified applicants to promote diversity within the industry. The code also creates a position for someone with public health expertise to provide support and advice to the Public Health Advisory Council. The governor's team is helping to draft these job descriptions and recommends the CCA prioritize hiring these individuals early on. The CCA has the opportunity to compete for top talent and will need to do so to ensure that social equity, public health, and other statutory goals are met. The creation of the CCA also comes with many demands that will take considerable time and resources. In the coming months, the CCA's board will need to establish foundational policies and systems that we often take for granted, including in the areas of human resources, finance, and procurement. The board will also need to make short and long-term strategic decisions about how to accomplish its statutory mandates, including budgeting and hiring for fiscal years 22, 23, and 24. The administration stands ready to provide aid and guidance to the CCA in whatever way it needs. This summer, we've worked to prepare resources to support their work, including coordinating with other state entities who can provide services or lend expertise as the CCA works to expand its own. We're also helping the CCA to develop its budget request for the outgoing budget and providing advice around early marijuana policy decisions the board may want to consider, including on the question of equivalencies. We similarly look forward to providing whatever assistance we can to this commission as you prepare for reenactment. Thank you again for giving us the chance to share, and we look forward to the work ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Field, for being here for that report. Before I open it up to the committee for questions, I did want to ask one. You mentioned prioritizing hiring certain individuals early on, and I'm wondering if you could characterize, is there consideration being given to hiring anyone before you hire your executive director, or what the status of that is?
That's a great question. We're in, the board was recently appointed, so we're in the early stages of talking to the chair and the rest of the board about their priorities. We would love to get back to you here in the coming weeks on what those plans are, but it's really at the very earliest stages of thinking through hiring.
Okay, thank you. Members of the commission, do you have, subcommittee, do you have questions? Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that report. We have another report today from JLARC to present an analysis of how we did with the legislation compared to the original recommendations in the JLARC report of last fall. I understand, I think it's Justin Brown or Mark Gribben are here, or both?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mark Gribben from JLARC.
Mark, thank you for being here, and we're ready to hear your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm happy to be here and present this afternoon, I'll be talking with you about the follow-up work that we did to the 2021 Legalization Act. Does this mouse work on this computer now? No. There you go. Great. Thank you. All right. As you will recall, legislation enacted this past session legalizes adult possession of marijuana and, if reenacted, authorizes its eventual commercial sale. The legislation also directed JLARC to analyze the new law, compare it to what was in our what was proposed in our report, and present our analysis to the General Assembly. To start off, I'd like to give you an overview of what the Legalization Act accomplished. On the whole, Virginia's Legalization Act is largely consistent with the recommendations and options that we presented in our report. You can see here that 80% of what we recommended to include was in fact adopted. Additionally, 80% of the options we presented for achieving specific policy goals, such as promoting social equity, were also adopted. And this slide gives you a sense for the wide range of provisions that were enacted in the law. I believe you're all familiar with the act, so I wasn't planning to dwell here long. While the Legalization Act did address much of what JLARC recommended, the staff identified some areas where refinements or clarifications could be considered. Here I'll walk through those areas where we think further action should be strongly considered. The first in that category is possession limits. The law adopts a minimum legal age of 21 and sets a 1 ounce public possession limit. This is what we recommended and is consistent with other states. However, other legalized states have much stricter limits on the amounts that someone can possess in public before they are charged with a crime. The point of these stricter limits is presumably to deter illegal distribution. Most other states have misdemeanor possession charges that kick in at 1 to 5 ounces, depending on the state. And in most states, they gradually escalate the possession penalties up to felony charges for higher amounts. In contrast, Virginia only has a civil penalty for persons possessing anywhere from 1 to 16 ounces, at which point it becomes felony possession. There is no misdemeanor charge in between the two. Given the difference in Virginia's law and what we see in other states, we suggest you consider establishing a misdemeanor public possession limit that is lower than the current 16-ounce felony limit. The line at the top here is the current law, and you can see how much someone can have, and again, it's on their person or in a public place before there is a criminal charge. Keep in mind that 1 ounce is typically enough to last all but the heaviest users several weeks, so 16 ounces or 1 pound is a substantial amount for someone to be carrying around. That's about a gallon-sized Ziploc bag full of marijuana worth a few $1,000s. The line at the bottom is an example of what the possession limits would look like if you added in a misdemeanor charge, like most other states. If you wanted to be on the least punitive end of the scale compared to other states, you could set the possession amount, the misdemeanor possession amount could be set at 2.5 to 5 ounces. I want to reemphasize again that here we're only talking about the limits for how much someone can have on their person or in a public place. These limits do not apply to how much somebody could have in their home. Our second note on possession has to do with the equivalencies for marijuana products. The main point here is that the new VCCA will need to quickly pass regulations to define equivalencies, and it's my understanding that they are working in that direction. And next are the rules for adult use sales by medical marijuana license holders. The law allows the state's 5 medical licensees to participate in all aspects of the new market. This is similar to what we proposed in our report, with the one difference being that the law gives them a bigger retail footprint. Each medical licensee is allowed to sell adult use marijuana at all 6 of its currently allowed medical dispensaries. That's a total of 30 locations statewide, which would be equal to about 7% of all the retail stores that will be allowed. Given that these businesses would have a competitive advantage from being vertically integrated, we propose limiting them to half that number, or 3 per licensee. And this limit would, of course, only apply to their adult use sales. They could still sell medical marijuana at all of their locations. Hemp processors. This isn't something that we got into in our report, but in looking at the act, we saw there might be some unintended consequences from the special exceptions that are granted to hemp processors. Namely, it appears these exceptions might inadvertently create a loophole around the state's license caps and vertical integration restrictions. And that's because, unlike medical marijuana licensees, just about anyone can become registered as a hemp processor, and there's no limit on how many hemp processors there can be. As a result, it's possible that a number of big businesses could come in, plunk down $1 million, and use this loophole to establish a vertically integrated operation that's outside the license caps. To avoid that outcome, the state should eliminate those provisions that provide special treatment to hemp processors. Now, I know that there might be some interest in ensuring that the hemp processors are able to participate in the market. And if you want to facilitate that, another option for doing it would be to simply increase or eliminate the cap on marijuana manufacturing licenses. That would help any hemp processor who also wants to become a licensed marijuana manufacturer be able to get a license to do that without also letting them grow and sell at retail. Cultivation. Another issue we identified is how the caps on the 2 classes of cultivation licenses might work. The law creates a Class A and a Class B cultivation license. The Class A folks can grow marijuana, and Class B can grow low THC hemp. Most of the marijuana for the commercial market is going to come from those Class A cultivators, and the Class B license is just there mostly to help hemp growers. The issue here is that both classes will count towards the 450 license cap for cultivation. Consequently, Class B licenses will take away some undetermined number of opportunities from Class A licenses. And if there are not enough Class A licenses, there could be a serious undersupply problem in the market. The solution that we suggest you consider is setting separate license caps for the two types of cultivation licenses. Commercial market timeline. The new law creates a timeline for establishing the commercial marijuana market, which you can see in the first bullet there. We compared those dates to the ones we had in our report, and we noticed that the law may not leave enough time at the end for businesses to get their operations up and running. Currently, the law creates a 6-month window between when the regulator can accept its first license application and when retail sales can begin. That doesn't appear to be enough time for businesses and VCCA to do all the things they'll need to do before sales start. For example, businesses will need to submit applications, get approved for licenses, set up their operations, have them inspected by the regulator, and if they're a cultivator, actually grow their first marijuana crop. It'll be hard for businesses to get all that done in just 6 months. So to give them more time, the date for implementing regulations and accepting applications could be moved up by an additional 6 months. That would allow a full year from when applications can be accepted to the start of retail sales. The trade-off is that would shorten the amount of time that VCCA has to set the regulations and have them approved by this group. However, that shorter period would still give them more time than has been given to other state regulators, and they would have more time to process applications, perform inspections, and do all the other additional work that's going to be required on the back end. I should note that there is no requirement for anyone to actually start selling marijuana in January of 2024. That's just when the law allows it to happen. However, there's likely to be a lot of public expectation for the market to open at that time, and if the shelves are empty, it could be harder for the legal market to compete against an already entrenched illegal market. This slide is really targeted at VCCA. The takeaway here is if the market's going to open in January of 2024, VCCA should probably start drafting their regulations this fall. A regulatory authority. The law gives VCCA most of the powers and authority it will need to regulate the marijuana market. The one area we thought could use some clarification is making sure that they have the authority to create different classes of licenses within each license type. For example, they should be allowed to create large, medium, and small cultivation licenses. While that may not sound important, it's actually critical for ensuring the marijuana market isn't over or undersupplied. This is an approach that states like Washington and Colorado have taken to ensure that there's not too much marijuana being produced for their markets, because that excess marijuana can then, there's a risk that it can spill over to the illegal market or into neighboring states. It would also help prevent VCCA from, or help VCCA prevent a few large cultivators from taking over the market. This authority could also make life easier on licensees as well, because regulatory requirements could be scaled to different kinds of operations. For example, the regulator could create a different license class for folks who just want to set up an edibles bakery compared to folks who want to manufacture vape cartridges. Testing. This is another area where a lot of what we recommended was enacted, but there were just a few differences. Chiefly, the law gives VCCA all responsibility for overseeing marijuana testing labs, whereas we recommended giving some of those duties to the state's Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services. So some of what VCCA is being asked to do in the testing realm looks a lot like what DCLS does in other areas. So it might make sense to shift some of the responsibilities from VCCA to DCLS. This would replicate the approach the state has used in a few other regulatory areas. For example, the health department is the main regulator for drinking water quality, but private labs are the ones who actually test water samples, and DCLS is the agency that certifies those labs to do those tests. Splitting up these duties could be a little tricky, so we suggest that VCCA and DCLS work together to determine if and how that could be done and present their proposal, including any resource needs, to the appropriate legislative committees. The next topic is the Community Reinvestment Fund and Grant Program. As you'll recall, 30% of the state's net marijuana tax revenues will be deposited in a newly created Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Fund. A board is established to administer that fund, and the board will make grant awards to projects intended to improve communities. This structure is largely consistent with an option we developed in our report. The only difference is we recommended that the board be directed to take a number of additional steps to ensure transparency. And those steps are listed here on the slide, and those are consistent with our advice for other similar grant programs across the state. Continuing with social equity, we also looked at the criteria that the new law sets for social equity eligibility. As a refresher, if someone is eligible for social equity status, they qualify for assistance programs, low-interest loans, and get preferential treatment in the initial round of license awards. This is an area where other states have faced a number of challenges, so we could not recommend specific criteria. However, we did note that broader criteria may not be as effective as more narrow criteria. Broad criteria are appealing because they extend eligibility to more individuals, and you're less likely to leave out someone who's deserving. The trade-off is that those criteria also can bring in a lot of people who are not in economic need and have not been harmed by marijuana laws. With that in mind, we found that narrow criteria might be better able to accomplish some social equity goals. This slide shows you the current criteria for social equity eligibility. The key point here is that a person only needs to meet one of these criteria to qualify. While we can't firmly estimate how many people might be eligible under these criteria, not at this point because some of them will be defined by the regulator, we believe it will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 to possibly up to 1 million, depending on how the regulator defines the geographic areas in slides or bullets 4 and 5. Perhaps the broadest criteria is the one that extends eligibility to family members of persons convicted of marijuana offenses. This probably expands eligibility to around 300,000 people, but it could be more. In some ways, this large eligibility pool can be a good thing because, again, deserving people aren't being left out. But a key question to consider is how many of eligible family members are likely to have been harmed. If it's only a small portion, then the criterion could end up pulling in a lot of people who have not been harmed, and that would then increase competition and allow them to take away opportunities from those who have been harmed. This is something that appears to have happened under Illinois' social equity program, which uses similar, albeit somewhat broader, criterion. An additional wrinkle here is that it could be challenging for VCCA to verify familial status, which could in turn slow down social equity eligibility decisions and those license awards. So to reduce the chances of unintended parties benefiting from social equity status, the state could eliminate the criterion extending eligibility to family members of convicted persons. But again, there would be trade-offs to doing that.
Mr. Gribben, I had a question on that. Couldn't we also do something like say that family member is a consideration as long as they meet one or two of the other potential qualifiers on the previous slide?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that would be a way to make sure that those folks continue to qualify while still narrowing the pool somewhat.
Thank you.
Or actually probably substantially. This last slide is really for the new regulatory agency. Basically, we want to make sure that they establish a clear definition of business ownership for social equity applicants, the goal there being to prevent the types of misuse that have occurred in some other social equity programs. The next group of topics includes potential changes we believe merit some further consideration. We think these could improve the law or better achieve certain policy goals, but the case for action isn't as strong as in that first group that I just went through. Mr. Chair, I wasn't planning on going through all of these in detail in the interest of time, but I'm happy to field any questions at your discretion.
We'll get a copy of this presentation?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and is this conclude, or is there more?
I have a question slide, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, I just want to ask, before you leave that slide, do members of the subcommittee have questions about these additional legalization topics to consider? You know, I recognize we're seeing them for the first time, but if there are any questions specifically there, okay, we can move on to more general questions then.
And Mr. Chair, I would say that we are available, of course, to field any questions from members at any time after this presentation.
Thank you for your analysis. It's very thorough. I did have a few questions. You talked about the number of licensees going to a medical provider currently from as many as 6 to allowing possibly just 3. Is there any kind of method to saying whether it's 3 or 1 or 6? I know you feel they'll get more of a foothold. Is that the issue?
I think it was mostly just looking at how much market share there would be. So with the 6 retail locations, and keep in mind, each of the medical providers has a share of a designated part of the state. With the cap on retail licenses, then if the medical providers each can have 6 per provider, that's 30 retail locations. That comes out to about 7% of all the retail stores in the state. Again, there's no magic to changing that number. It was just our thought that if you can keep the share of retail stores lower, you have less of a chance of those larger and vertically integrated companies pushing out competition from smaller, non-vertically integrated companies that are only doing adult use. But there is no precise magic to that number.
Okay, thank you for the point, though. Members have questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One follow-up, and I know Don Scott's also chomping at the bit. To your previous question, I mean, there's plenty of other ways to provide a vertically integrated limitation in terms of monopoly, and that's certainly been part of our subcommittee discussions throughout this bill's process through multiple hours and multiple different committees across the House and Senate. Things like guaranteeing product diversity. In other words, 40% of your shelf space can't be from one company. There's lots of ways that you can guarantee process. Is that right?
Yes, Senator, that's true. That would be something that the regulator could do through regulations, for example. And so that would be another way to address that concern.
Delegate Herring?
Thank you. Just a quick question regarding the VCCA, and you mentioned the draft regulations would have to be issued sometime this fall. And given that it's just established, I just want to make sure that we're on time. Could it fall late fall, or were you talking about September?
In terms of beginning work, I think the idea that they would begin work on drafting the initial regulations. I know there had been some talk in the public domain about waiting until the laws were finalized and reenacted in the next session before work on regulations begins. So our thought there was that the regulator should not wait until after the next assembly session to begin work on that. They should begin the process of drafting those, and then they could make changes as necessary. Right. But the regulatory process, it could not proceed to the next stage until the laws were finalized in the next assembly session. But they will be ready at the end of that session to then move forward with the next phase of the regulation setting process, which I believe is it would either be a submission to this group or it could be a public comment period. I would have to check that.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Delegate Scott.
Hey, thank you. That was a great presentation. First question related to the question from Majority Leader Herring. Would DCLS be able to help VCCA get started soon on those regulations? Because it sounds like that was a workforce issue that you were kind of bringing up, maybe some duplication of efforts. Do you think that might help them move forward a little bit faster? Is that why you suggested DCLS?
Sort of two parts to that answer, Delegate Scott. The first part is that DCLS could bring some expertise that VCCA wouldn't necessarily have. So they might be able to set regulations relating to testing faster than if VCCA was doing that task all by themselves. I hesitate there because I'm sure that DCLS would probably need to bring in some people to work on that, and I can't speak to what their capacity would be to jump in and start doing that right away. But generally, I would expect that if setting regulations was shared between the groups with DCLS working on testing regulations and VCCA working on most of the other regulations, that could make them result in a faster process.
Okay. I have several questions. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Next question regarding, you were talking about hemp versus marijuana and the capacity for a hemp manufacturer to come in, plop down $1 million, and then start marijuana processing and go outside the regulatory structure. Explain to me how that works, because I thought that was the reason that we set it up this way. So the hemp couldn't do marijuana, regular marijuana. So explain to me, or regular cannabis.
Yes, Delegate Scott, I'm not a lawyer, so I would defer to the lawyers in the room. But my layman's read of the law is that there's a potential way to read this that would allow someone to go and become registered as an industrial hemp processor. And Delegate, you or I could go and register as an industrial hemp processor today. It's a small fee and you fill out a form. And then they could then use that status as, oh, I am now an industrial hemp processor, so now I am exempt from the license caps, and if I pay $1 million, I can be vertically integrated. Again, that is my read. I would again defer to the lawyers as to whether or not how I'm reading that right. But in the interest of caution, we would recommend that you all take a look at that and see if that is indeed the case, and if there's some changes that could be made to prevent that from happening.
Thank you for that, because that definitely caught my attention. And then the last question I have related to the medical marijuana providers. You say they're about 7% of the market, what you would project to be the market to be, even with the 60 locations. Is there an opportunity for the regulatory folks to require some of those 60 licenses to be social equity licenses?
That's a good question, Delegate. Just a point of clarification. There's 5 medical providers, and each one can have up to 6 retail locations. So that would be a total of 30.
Okay.
And again, that they would only control 7% of the stores. So they could have a greater market share or less market share, depending on how competitive they are. In terms of whether or not those could be social equity licenses, I don't believe that it would be possible, because the companies that have the medical licenses have already been awarded. So unless they meet the social equity status, so those licenses have already been given out. It's just the number of stores that they can open once they participate in the market. I'm sure there's some way you could craft something where they could work with other companies, but I'm not sure how that would work.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just opening up my imagination. Thank you.
I understand Delegate Krizak, you had some questions?
Yeah, thank you for the great report, and also thank you for the work you did prior to the last session before we took up this bill. That was invaluable information that you provided. I have a couple questions. One, you talk about already entrenched illegal market, and do we have any data on how entrenched it is, and are we going to be tracking, or are you going to be tracking that as we go along, especially in the retail sales for the next 3 years or so?
In terms of how entrenched it is, probably the best measure is prior to legalization, how many regular marijuana users there were. And in that case, Virginia, I can't remember the exact number, but I believe the adult population was 7% or less. In terms of going forward, it's sort of a hard figure to track. I know that other states have done estimates of this. For example, the consultant that we brought in has estimated how much of the market share in Colorado is legal versus illegal. But in terms of exact numbers, I'd have to check with them as to how that...
What about the arrest data on who's being arrested for selling?
That would be another way to track it, and you could see if there is a decline. One of the things that you'd have to be able to tell the difference, though, is who is selling, I guess if everybody's, if
all
it's all
illegal
legal, right?
right now.
You could be reselling a legal product, which I guess wouldn't make much of a difference because it would still be an illegal activity.
Right, I think that's something that we should look into. The other concern, or not concern, but I was wondering if you had thought about oversaturation of different regions in the sale of cannabis, or even communities or neighborhoods. And also, kind of along those lines, since you brought it up regarding the vertical integration, are you concerned about one or two companies having, I mean, there's up to, what is there, 400 licenses right now? There's nothing in the law that prevents, a handful of companies from getting all 400 retail licenses. And is there a concern there? Is there any suggestion on how to handle that?
Ms. Delegate, so in the first question, saturation, the law as it's set up, and this is similar to something we recommended, there is the regulatory authority has the ability to determine where retail locations can go, and they are supposed to consider specifically health implications on surrounding communities. That's similar to what we had recommended, and I believe if they do that right, that should help address that issue. But again, the proof will be in the pudding. But that is written into the law as a requirement that they're supposed to consider when handing out the retail licenses. In terms of the ability of one company to obtain multiple licenses, I recall, and you'll have to forgive me, that this was a large bill that went through several drafts. At one point, there was a restriction on how many licenses a single entity can hold. I cannot recall if that continued into the final form. You're shaking your head, so I'm assuming
I don't
it
think
did not.
so, but I'm looking for a friend in the audience, but I don't think it's in there.
And I can double check that,
So that's-
but I believe that, I believe your reading is correct.
I have one last question.
Okay, Delegate Kriesek.
I have one last question. The Cannabis Reinvestment Equity Board, very important part of this bill, and you mentioned that it was about 7.8 to 12.9 million, or maybe that was Dr. Field that mentioned that, but that's going to be needed. That's going to be provided to that in the first year of legal sales. It's kind of a cart before the horse situation with that, because they need the money to get it out there to invest it in the social equity licensees, and and to get the money, to get the tax money, you need the social equity licensees out there selling product, so there's something to tax. Do you see, have you thought of any kind of a process in which we would invest money, or put some seed money, no pun intended, into this ahead of time?
Yes, Delegate. Before I answer that question, I'm going to back up to the previous question. There's one important point I wanted to note. The law does restrict anybody from selling their license. So if you decide not to be a marijuana business anymore, you can't just sell your license to another company. And that was something we recommended that was incorporated into the law.
That's unlike the medical marijuana.
Right, correct. So on the adult use side, I believe that that provision would prevent one company from buying up licenses from others, and would theoretically help prevent consolidation, at least at a quick rate. My apologies, Delegate.
No, that's a good, thank you, Mr. Chairman. He's going to answer that last question, and then I'll give back my time.
Okay, before we move on to Delegate Adams, Delegate Curran.
Mr. Chairman, he has one last.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, Delegate Kriesek, the question about the having the money up front is another issue that we identified in the report, and our suggestion there, and maybe was simply to fund a lot of this with a working capital advance, and because that money, which is how the state has funded other enterprises, for example, the Virginia Information Technologies Agency was stood up with a working capital advance, and other quote-unquote revenue-generating activities have been stood up with those funds. The idea is that once that commercial market opens, and even once you start issuing licenses and collecting application fees, that the regulator will start having that income, and then once sales start, the tax revenue would be more than enough to repay any upfront costs. I know there's some accounting issues with how that works, but those would be beyond my capabilities.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, before we move on to Delegate Adams, Delegate Herring had a follow-up to Delegate Krizak.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's, on the first question, I believe it was about illegal activity in the market, or how much illegal activity is happening. I would, my only caution in using arrest records is that, after decriminalization, African Americans were still arrested at a higher rate. So I'm concerned that we're not going to get an accurate picture if we just use that. And so if there's a way that we can use something else and something in addition to, because I think that it's not going to necessarily capture the correct number. And that's just my only flag on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Adams, you had questions?
I do. I'm just hoping I can articulate them. I appreciate this report. I had a chance to review the whole report earlier, and I really appreciate all the work. I'm kind of struck with a couple things, so I'm just trying to frame them as questions, but more it's just maybe I don't understand. So I'll start with what I'm passionate about, which is the medical cannabis side of this. I don't fully understand the need to come at limiting them in terms of number of places, since it's already incredibly difficult for patients to access medical cannabis, both in products and product availability and just general access to the program. It seems to me that we could drive down the cost to patients if these already set up dispensaries were allowed to sell adult recreational use. That way they could transfer that reduction in cost. It also seems like through the medical programs, they've already developed a lot of ways to test products and do many of the things that we're looking to stand up on the recreational side. And so certainly it seems like there could be some way to leverage that rather than cut it. I understand competition, you want it to be fair, but it's only 7% of the market now. So it seems like some kind of delayed response, like they had to start later or something like that, where we could still leverage that and learn from what we've learned in the medical side. And then and thinking about just in general, I know that we benchmark Colorado and some other states around the taxation, but as a medical, so I'm a clinician, and what I'm thinking about is just really looking at the fact that tobacco and alcohol, in my opinion, is more dangerous. And so I look at the taxation of spirits, which is about 20%, and I look at the taxation of cigarettes and the variations, and then I look at this threshold of 30% potentially on cannabis, and it just seems disproportionately high, especially when we're talking about being a state that's focused on equity. So all these things are sort of swirling around in my head. I hope you can find the question in there, but it's just I'm trying to put all this together.
Mr. Chair, Delegate Adams. The point on the medical providers, one of the things we did recommend on the report was to allow them to participate at the very least on the cultivation and manufacturing side, because recognizing that they have the capability to help get this market off the ground. Your points are things that we've heard before, and they're very well taken. Just the thought was that if the goal is to make sure we have enough new people coming in, just to make sure that there's plenty of opportunities for them that aren't taken up by companies that will have a competitive advantage by being vertically integrated. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they would take over the whole market if they had 6 versus 3. And again, there's no magic in that number. That's just what we put forward as an idea to help allow them to participate while ensuring that there's places at the table for all the additional folks that the legislature or the folks behind the bill wanted to see joining in the market.
Follow-up?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you. And sort of separately, and to follow up with Delegate Scott's comments around hemp, I guess where is the place for us to sort of address the issues around hemp? Right now, we really don't have any age limits on hemp. There's really no safety protocols on hemp. There's no laboratory requirements and testing on hemp. And now Delta 8, which at the start of General Assembly, when I brought Delta 8 up, nobody had heard of it. Now it is just it's proliferated at some lightning speed. I've never seen anything take on a life so fast, not even kombucha. So it's worrisome because there is absolutely no age limit on this. When it degrades into Delta-9 THC, which is the intoxicant, and that is problematic because now we have kids that can go to any store. So where in this whole structure, because I think, you know, it also gets into the social equity piece of infringing on the larger, you know, development of cannabis, the cannabis industry. Where does that fit?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Adams, I wish I had a good answer for that. Hemp was not something that we got into much in our report. We realized there is that crossover there, and going through the bill, we did notice this one potential issue. But those are certainly significant issues. I really couldn't say much out of it in terms of, you know, we don't really have any research to back up a choice there, but I know that VDAX is the lead regulator. Those might be some folks that you could talk to about that. I'm sure there's others who are operating that space that might be able to give you some advice into how those issues could be addressed.
And Delegate Scott had a follow-up as well.
Yeah, I had a follow-up. Going back to, you keep saying about 7% of the locations, but not market share for medical providers. But they 0% of adult use rec, right, as is anticipated now. So we shouldn't even be including them when we talk about adult use and the market that we're talking about moving forward, because they're 0% of that market, correct?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Scott, that's correct. Right now, there is no adult use market. They will be the ones who are best positioned and are probably the only ones that you can guarantee will be ready to sell on January 1st, 2024, which is why it's important to have them as part of the market. But so they will be positioned to be the first arrivals in the market, and they will be positioned to, because of their vertical integration, they may have competitive advantages over other folks who cannot control their own supply chains.
But right now, the legislation doesn't permit them to be adult use sellers ever, correct?
Mr. Chair, Delegate Scott, no, the legislation does. It allows them to participate fully in the adult market and sell marijuana, adult use marijuana at all of their 6 authorized dispensary locations.
Beginning when the regulatory structure is put in place?
Beginning January 1st, 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Hear another question from Delegate Grisak.
Yeah, I just want to get clarification on that. So you're saying that if they do that and they use all 30 licenses, they would then have about 6%. It's 36% of 400. Is that what it is?
Mr. Chair, Delegate, 7%.
Okay, and so have you figured out what percentage of the actual market that they could have, the market share, if you will?
Mr. Chair, Delegate, we calculated the cultivation share at one point, and I believe that number may be in our report. I believe based on the facilities of the 4 facilities that have been set up so far, it was a significant amount of the early percent, but not enough, not a majority of it. I would have to look back in our report to see what that number was.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I want to change the topic just for a moment to a recommendation brought up earlier that I think probably be possibly among the more controversial. I'm reluctant to create a lot of new penalties, as I think a lot of the members of this commission or subcommittee are. And you had suggested that there be a penalty for an intermediate penalty before someone possesses, I think it was a pound of cannabis outside their home, something between the allowable amount and was it a pound? Was it 5 pounds? 1 pound.
Mr. Chairman, 1 pound.
I want to ask, do you have the ability to, even at a future meeting, to drill down a little bit about other states? I mean, because there are other options besides a criminal penalty. There could be a more severe financial penalty, or it could stay as it is. But I'm curious if there are any other states that are not putting criminal penalties for just exceeding the personal amount allowed.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have some of that information right now if you'd like me to share. We looked at Originally, we only looked at the states that had legalized at the time, but this list has been updated to include those that have legalized in the past couple of months. Virginia, Oregon, Montana, and Michigan out of excuse me, 21 states are the ones that have a civil penalty if you were over the legal possession amount. All the other states go straight from the legal limit to either a misdemeanor or in 2 cases a felony. And so if you look at how Virginia compares, we do stand out in that we are the only state where we have this large, you can have we have significantly higher amount that you can have without being charged with a criminal offense. Now again, it's a policy choice for the General Assembly. We're not commenting on it one way or the other, but just compared to other states, it's significantly different.
Thank you. Are we done with our questions for Mr. Gribben? Okay. Thank you for the thorough report, both your initial report and particularly the latest update. We look forward to staying in touch with you as we continue to develop this. And I have a question for David May. David, can you keep a kind of a list? We've got a list from JLARC now of their concerns about policy considerations that this committee might entertain if we were to recommend a particular course. Can you keep a list as we go through of others that come to our attention? Is that appropriate? Okay, thank you. Okay. Now, next on the agenda, we have discussion on a few topics that were put forward that we don't have to limit it to, but in the interest of time, we may want to stick at least mostly to those. One of them was expediting legal access and commercial sales. And David, did you receive suggestions at all for if we were to do that, how that would work? On expediting legal access and commercial sales, did we receive any suggestions about pharmaceutical processors if we were to allow them to help us expedite, if there were a way to continue focus on social equity at all?
Mr. Chair, yes, we did receive a suggestion from the pharmaceutical processors, which basically one avenue of moving up the date of sales by using the pharmaceutical processors' existing resources. The suggestion was to come up with possibly like a temporary permit structure because there's going to be some lag time on the authority setting up their regulations, obviously. So the suggestion was to come up with a temporary permit process under which primarily pharmaceutical processors would operate, given some sort of like skeletal rule system that they would operate under until the authority's regulations went into place. And in doing so, the suggestion included an idea that pharmaceutical processors that engaged in this temporary permit would take on approximately 5 social equity licensees in like an incubator program where they would help get them started. They would make an investment which would go to the board to be divvied out to help these social equity applicants get started with the idea of not letting them get a head start without letting anybody else enter the market at the same time.
Okay, and Delegate Herring?
All right. I guess, how would this work? I guess I'm a little concerned when, is it like an incubator for a social equity licensee? And then would it be a situation where basically, honestly, what's happened often in the state and others where social equity licensee or a minority or a woman is used with their license or their designation for a larger company to then start into the market. And that's something that I am very concerned about and would not support.
Could that be restricted or?
Well, it sounds like what happens a lot in government contracting in situations where either a minority or a woman is brought into, is used as, and the company says, we'll incubate you, or we'll sign you up with this, and like, we're a partner, wink, and then they get access to the social equity license, and then that does, honestly, violent, I don't want to say violence, but it just is not in the spirit of what we were talking about, and I'm really concerned about that. Very, very concerned about that sort of, let's speed up, and it negates, it does harm to this whole spirit of what we were trying to do with social equity license. And that I'm very concerned about that. So if there's some other way to allow the social equity licensee to establish on their own without, using their designation to profit, to allow a larger company to profit, that would be greatly appreciated. But I just flag it and have concerns.
It's an important issue to flag, and I just want to ask Mr. May, if there, I don't know if there is a good answer, but are there ways, if we were to allow social equity applicants to be incubated by medical processors to qualify them that they're truly a worthy or qualified social equity applicant? Are there any safeguards that can be put in place?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So I guess a couple of specifics to point out. Obviously, this is only a proposed plan at this point, so there's nothing official. But the way that the proposed plan would work would these incubated licensees, social equity licensees, would be separate, independent of the pharmaceutical processor. So there would be no tie. The board would actually be the one picking the licensees to participate in this program. So, and it's going to be done under the same criteria that we have for the overall structure of the bill, that they would be making these decisions. So if we do have a problem in that regard, then we already have it under the bill because they're going to be using the same criteria. So, and I understand the concerns of Leader Herring there. I think it's one of the issues that was highlighted by JLAR. In their report, they talked about defining ownership. We kind of did the best we could at the time to try to alleviate those concerns by requiring a certain percentage of ownership in a company by a qualified social equity applicant. So now what it really comes down to is narrowing that definition of ownership to prevent big companies from circumventing the rules by putting on a front as if it is owned by a social equity applicant. So the question is whether I think JLAR's recommendation was to let the agency go down that road and really define ownership to help alleviate those concerns. So really the question is just who does it, but right now we have a structure in place. It's just a matter of how that structure is implemented, even when we have our full licensing scheme underway.
Delegate.
Yes. No one does anything for free. So, and maybe it's back coming up with a way, again, and I'm concerned about true in the spirit of allowing business ownership and also the profits that come with it. And I know nothing's for free. And when companies incubate some money, unless it's a truly benevolent company, and if they are, then they wouldn't be in business. So,
Well, I think their advantage would be the commercial, that they'd be participating in commercial sales while they're incubating.
all I say is if that we go down that route, let's really be careful because we do not want to make the mistakes of the past where then again, it just is not in the spirit of what was intended. And I just like for us to break that cycle and not contribute it to it.
Good points. Thank you. Delegate Krisak.
Delegate Scott, one second.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I think he was trying to get your attention from me. I think, and I appreciate Mr. May's comments and the majority leaders too. I think we've set up a lot of parameters and a lot of different organizations. We have a social equity, cannabis equity investment. We have business side. We have health. I think we have to hopefully hope that this legislation gives enough of an outline to empower those folks to address these concerns that we have specifically. And if they don't, then I guess we'll have to come back and do something with the legislation. But it sounds like we've put a lot of things in place from the regulatory perspective to allow these folks to put some of these ideas in place. Regarding some of the medical stuff, I would be very disappointed if all of these medical providers don't have a robust internal social equity program themselves that doesn't require legislation. And I think if they don't, then I guess we'll have to help them do the job that they don't want to do.
Thank you. Delegate Krizak?
So I just wanted to back up a little bit, kind of, this discussion is 4.1, expediting legal access and commercial sales. And why are we doing it? Why are we entertaining this? And the reason we're entertaining this is because we have legalized marijuana, the use of marijuana, but we have not legalized the actual purchase of marijuana. So we have a period of time here, right, for three and a half years before it would be legal to purchase marijuana. And it's many states, especially in California, and I did a little research on this, it's been you still have all of the problems that we were trying to solve by legalizing marijuana. You still have black people being disproportionately arrested selling marijuana, because the black market, if you will, is out there, and people think it's, they know it's legal, they've heard it's legal, and they probably think that they can buy it legally, and it's going to become more and more difficult to make that, to explain that to the general public. We don't want to facilitate an illegal market out there, and we don't want to make it so that more people are being arrested. What we need to do is get the safe sales of marijuana out there as soon as possible. You can't import it from out of state because of federal law. So there is nobody else that's ready, I guess, other than the medical pharmaceutical folks. So my point is, I just want to make it clear that there's a reason behind this topic discussion. I think it's important that we take that into account, because there are situations in California, for example, where people actually are working for people who are selling, and they think that they work for a legal employer, and they're getting arrested. So this is a problem. So we need to come up with something. I think the sooner we can get some sales out there, so that people aren't breaking the law by buying and selling, the better. And so I just wanted to remind everybody of why we're having this discussion on this topic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Krizak. And I'll also just remind folks that the General Assembly decided that we wanted to have a new independent agency as the licensor, and that's part of the delay. Not that we can't consider other options. And Mr. May, or members of the committee, there's been some discussion from people who would like to find a legal avenue to buy seeds or clippings for personal cultivation. Do we have any options that come to mind if we were to try and do that sooner than 2024?
Mr. Chair, not offhand.
Okay, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but it's something that we should maybe consider for future meetings as something the public has expressed some interest in. Members of the committee, unless there's more discussion on expediting legal access and commercial sales, the next topic was on market structure, vertical integration, and license caps. And in the bill, I'll remind folks that we did codify caps. The question is generally if this should be a decision that the regulator should have some flexibility on based on supply, demand, cost, and effect on the black market. I know that we put in the bill that there'd be up to 400 licenses for the whole state, and questioning whether we'd be better served to have the regulator set the number. We know that like ABC stores, there are 388 stores, but over 20,000 licensed locations where you can purchase wine and beer as well. So that's considerable difference. We've in our bill put in 400 retail licenses, 25 wholesaler, 60 manufacturer, 450 cultivation. I don't know if there's any comments today on that. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator McPike.
I don't know about comments to your specific statements, but are we are you accepting comments now to the category that's on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, if I might, Mr. Chairman. I guess to Delegate Kruzik's question earlier, I think we've illustrated a number of different examples today through both Jay Lark as well as Council David May's sort of responses that we've allowed a lot to the regulatory agency to set limits. The question earlier was in regards to the number of retail license caps, and if you look to 4.1-805 on page 144 of the bill, there's a section that says the new regulatory agency can determine, so we've allowed some of that flexibility in terms of does one entity have 100% license? Well, if you read that, likely not. But I think it's part of our job as oversight to interface. And we're a little bit ahead of the game because we don't have yet parties to interface with and have a dialogue as they're developing regs. And so I think there are a lot of detailed questions that we need to keep on our forefront as the regs are developed so we can circle back and answer some of those critical questions. In regards to, Mr. Chairman, the earlier statement from Jay Lark in regards to industrial hemp, and I think it is true as written, I think during our subcommittee discussions, we didn't have enough time to sort of get it right. I think there are a number of different concerns. I've done some travel in Southwest Virginia to Southside Virginia as well. In fact, I was in just south of Tazewell a couple weeks ago and looked at a cannabis producer that it shut down. I know the market from the farmer's perspective, some of them got really hurt during the earlier industrial hemp grow, and there's been different models that have come out that are more collaborative and co-op, so there's profit sharing between producers and farmers. And I think there are ways that we should be aware to not penalize people working together as we look at that. And so that's what I've seen different things across Virginia, and I think some farmers are hesitant to get into the market because of fluctuations and price risk and different risk involved unless there's some form of collaboration. And so I think in consideration of when we talk about vertical integration, I think we should be mindful of what it means if there's partial or collaboration amongst those who are cultivating and farmers and those producing and sort of refining the product. So I think there's a couple of different things we should be mindful of, that we don't put artificial barriers where you actually have people that want to work together and also share in the profits and the risk associated with it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for those points, Senator. Yes, Delegate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have one question. I can't get my head around why we're trying to limit the transferability of these licenses. Because it would seem to me that if you're trying to help communities of color maybe subsidize an industry that hasn't existed previously, access to capital is a critical component. And some people who might be eligible for a license may not have the access to capital to be able to make this a reality. And allowing the transferability of those licenses would seem to me to be a good vehicle to achieve a goal there. I didn't know who could speak to that.
Is there anyone on the panel who would like to address that?
I guess I'm unclear of the delegate's question. Is it that they would sell their license and that would be the access to capital, or?
Madam Leader, I think my question would be, would it make sense to allow for the transferability of that license by an individual who would be eligible for a license as a means to be able to generate income for themselves or their family, for instance?
Right. So.
Delegate Herring.
Yes. And I'm no government contract expert. Well, maybe I am, but I see this as no different as any federal designation. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but I don't think a veteran can transfer or sell their eligibility to somebody else. That is not following as a disabled vet or a woman, their designation. And I think the concept, in my opinion, is this is not a flash in the pan sort of something for you to sell so you can feed your family for a month or two. This is about helping individuals build businesses that last,
perhaps generations and creating generational wealth, to be blunt. And especially for those who are impacted in a negative way, of course, with the enforcement of our marijuana laws for so long. So, I mean, it's just my personal view, but it's just sort of like, you can give a man a fish, you can give him a fish, or you can teach him to fish. And I think that's the concept, at least the way that I see it. And so that's just my input.
Thank you, Delegate Herring, and thank you, Delegate Campbell, for raising the topic. Were there any other comments today from members of the commission on market structure?
Well, I just want to follow up.
Delegate Adams.
I do think that Delegate Campbell has a point, and maybe if I'm interpreting it correctly, which is.
Get your microphone closer.
Oh, sorry. If in fact you build a business and you do well, and you want to, so it's, I guess, the opposite end, and you don't want to have it transfer to your family because nobody's interested. So it's not a generational wealth issue, but more of you're selling a successful company, then you're creating wealth that you can then distribute generationally however you want to. So am I understanding that that's kind of the other end?
Delegate Adams, I think you're understanding the question perfectly well. If you are trying to create generational wealth, this is a means with which to deliver that by allowing the transfer of these licenses, or in fact by creating maybe a sub-license structure in which a pharmaceutical manufacturer could contract with the ultimate licensee to be able to utilize the license and pay a royalty to that license holder. I think about, you think about the casinos that developed on Indian reservations, by the federal government for years. Harrah's came in and purchased the right to be able to operate that casino, and they pay those tribes royalties effectively. So I don't know why this could not be, have a similar structure, quite frankly.
Thank you, Delegate. I would just comment that there's probably a difference between winning a license and kind of flipping it right away and having it in your family for 5 or 10 years that you worked it, and then at retirement wanting to close it out, so to speak, if that's the case. Senator McPike?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think part of the discussion, as I recall from the subcommittees, was around having methods or tools in place to prevent larger companies from consuming, say, the Herring, the Adams, the Lucas, the Eben, and now have 20% market share. And so the transferability issue, I think, gets around the question of an ultimate goal or objective of, do you have mechanisms in place to ensure there's decent competition across? And so I think it speaks to some of the transferability issues and some of the blanks we have now in regs to develop of how do we fill in those blanks if that's a policy desired by the General Assembly. In other words, do you want 3 operators that are well capitalized to go through and buy out? And if you look through the code, that's why there are certain regulations and periods that are put in place. Are there pros and cons to it? I think that's what we're having a discussion on. Maybe there's another more better way or a different way to achieve those goals and objectives and still sort of tackling the same issues. I think that's something that is worthy to try to figure out the right mix of.
Okay, thank you. Are there other comments on market structure regarding license caps or integration?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Herring.
Yes, no, and I appreciate
Give you the last word.
Delegate Campbell's question because it does sort of open up the box to think through things. The only other thing I would say is that that sort of designations that happen on the federal side, those companies are passed down, but of course they still exist again without, if a father, a veteran, leaves the company to a son who's not, they're just not categorized that way. And I just want to make sure I'm remembering the legislation that we have regular licenses allowed as well as social equity. So, correct? So I think there's a misperception out there, just generally in the public, that is only social equity license, and there are others. So I just leave that there, but I thank Delegate Campbell for your question because it was a good question.
Okay. I'm going to give you the last word on this topic.
I'm sorry.
Delegate Adams? No.
I guess, the other thought is just, it just seems like, again, to Delegate Campbell's point, that if, say you had a license and your company isn't doing well, right? And so then rather than go bankrupt, you could transfer your license to somebody that might do a better job. But wouldn't a possible solution be then just to have capitations on percentage of ownership? Like, so however many licenses are out there, that no one entity can have an overarching percent, isn't that just going to take care of itself?
Well, that's one way to deal with that particular concern.
I mean, I'm just asking,
Yeah,
because it
no, I
just
think
seems
you're
like
right
it's
on that concern. That's one way to address it. Let's move on to our third discussion point, which was on equity licensing, which we heard some good suggestions from Jay Lark, I think. Did anyone want to comment on those or bring up other points on equity licenses for today?
Counsel?
David, did you have something?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to note before we moved on from that topic that just to remind that some of the discussions we had both in the House and Senate side on the transferability, we had looked at the ABC licenses, and in Virginia, ABC licenses are not transferable, with the idea being that we have vested the ABC authority with the power to determine who is eligible for a license, who can safely operate a license. So in doing so, the licensee doesn't really own their license. It's not transferable. You can't sell it. If you forego that license, then ABC will determine if the next person who's going to take over is eligible or not. The difference here would be obviously that we have a cap on these licenses where we don't have that in ABC. So the supply is different, the demand is different. We did talk about what that would look like, given that if all of the licenses allowed are taken, if a licensee was to own their license, after that initial granting of the license and the operation of the business, only maybe players in the market with a lot of money would be able to purchase that license because it would be worth so much money. That was the scenario that we did contemplate when we were making that decision.
Thank you for that reminder. Now, let's see, were there any additional comments on equity licensing, either from Jay Lark suggestions or otherwise, members would like to raise at today's meeting? Okay. I have some statistics on state of policing and prosecution. I don't know if we had any handouts for the, is there a handout that's been distributed to members of the committee or that can be?
Yeah.
Okay, people have it. So in your packets, you should have from the Criminal Sentencing Commission list of sentencing events over the last several years, including possession of marijuana for fiscal year 2021. That was last year's $25 fine for having a possession of a small amount in public, showing that there's about 2810. I don't know if other people want to comment on these or just want to take them and digest them, but it shows that there's still events. It also shows a lot of events that might have more than one infraction, including and more serious offenses like selling with possessing with the intent to distribute or selling. So that's for your reference, unless there are any comments. Okay, we had a list that was suggested on today's agenda for future meetings. I'm just going to read it and ask people if there are other ideas that they'd like to have considered to either that you can raise them now or raise them after the meeting, prior to the next meeting before we set an agenda. Those included resentencing and review of people who are incarcerated for a marijuana-related offense, parental rights, meaning of people who've lost parental rights over marijuana charges, employment protections, housing rights, and how we're dealing with youth and those under 18 and under 21 in terms of possession and treatment and any penalty. And then lastly, I'm not sure what this means, but adding the medical board to the Cannabis Control Authority. Those are topics that have been suggested for our future meeting. Are there others that come to mind now? Okay. We're prepared to take public comment today from those in the audience. I want to say for those that are watching online, you can submit written comment to committee operations at senate.virginia.gov. That's committee operations, one word, at senate.virginia spelled out.gov. And we're happy to take your comment. And the more specific you want to be about changes or things you'd like to stay the same in the bill that was passed last year for next year's reenactment, the subcommittee would appreciate them. With that, if there are members in the audience who'd like to address us, I'm going to ask people to restrict their time to 3 minutes. And we're happy to hear from you. If you could just introduce yourself.
I'm going to ask for some time dispensation so Ms. Griffin can give you the copies of my comments. And I do actually have a ninth one, so we can handle everybody. But for the sake of brevity, I will get started. Honorable Chair, Honorable Madam Vice Chair, members of the Oversight Committee, Senate staff, and members of the public. My name is Michael McDermott. I'm with Faces of Voices of Recovery of Virginia. Favor Virginia's mission is identifying and sharing peer recovery service, access gaps, and best practices to improve Virginia's recovery outcomes and community quality through transparent, equitable, unified, inclusive, responsive, nonpartisan, supportive, sustainable, disciplined, and fundamentally focused, non-bureaucratic grassroots advocacy efforts. I've been a Commonwealth of Virginia resident since March of 1993 and have enjoyed continuous and sustained recovery from substance use disorder since November 15th of 1991. I'm going to skip the next paragraph for time, but it basically is the boilerplate verbiage from HB 2312 and SB 1406. But specifically, there is a line there that, in my lived experience opinion, the narrow focus implied by the term cannabis use disorder hinders effective assistance to those individuals prone to substance misuse, as evidenced by the alcohol versus non-alcohol delta disappearance in the chart. If you look at that chart very quickly, that's Virginia Department of Health emergency responses incidences, and you'll see there's a delta between alcohol and non-alcohol that disappears in March of last year when the economic stimulus money became available to people. However, the overall blue line did not change, which shows that there's unintended consequences dealing with people who misuse substances. Individual misuse substances will substitute one for another. In this case, people substituted opiates for alcohol. Cannabis, like alcohol, opiates, nicotine, is addictive. My point being is that legalization of any substance having misuse potential does not guarantee linearly predictive outcomes in a single substance or social result silo. And here follows another good example of unintended consequences other states have encountered. When they did a study of recreational cannabis laws, they found that where it had been legalized, there was a 54% increase in heroin potency, a 7.3% increase in state illegal Oxycontin prices, and increased potency. These potencies correlate to increased criminal and overdose activity, both affecting overall community quality of life. We in Virginia have an historic opportunity to learn not only from our past regulatory efforts regarding alcohol and tobacco, but also from other states farther along this very slippery slope of marijuana legalization and regulation. I challenge those like you making these policy decisions and implementing them to view them through broad lenses, being sensitive to the many dimensions of substance use disorder. Resilience, agility, and responsiveness must be hallmarks of our Commonwealth's creative and measured approach to not only cannabis oversight, but in other related areas as well. Furthermore, in the spirit of nothing about us without us, we must increase lived experience representation on our marijuana and cannabis advisory boards, as well as mandating specified funding percentages to non-governmental organizations using evidence-based lived experience substance use disorder recovery service providers from marijuana tax revenues. Lastly, regarding the many anecdotal references we hear concerning cannabis's current potency, as in this is not your grandma's marijuana, I'm here to tell you otherwise. I have lived experience. Unlike Bill Clinton, I did inhale. And I'm here to tell you that although harder to source and more expensive, potent cannabis could and was found and misused 50 years ago. Thank you for indulging my comments, which I'm submitting electronically for the record, and which include hyperlinks to the 2 data sources I cited as unintended consequences.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott, for sharing that with us. Are there other members of the public who'd like to comment?
Good evening, Chairman, Vice Chairman. My name is James Slade. I'm a citizen of Richmond. I have a few bullet points to discuss. They were basically questions, but since you being the Oversight Committee, you're looking for the information just like I am. Neighborhoods, like the one that I grew up in, it was in the 80s, the 90s was really affected. I grew up in Richmond, West End area, near West End, right down near Maymont. But now it's a gentrified neighborhood, so when it comes to the social equity, how would that work? I mean, if someone like me who grew up in that neighborhood and experienced the policing that I have, but moved out of the neighborhood because of gentrification, will they still qualify? Also, medical versus recreation, another bullet point. Will the medical and the recreational be subject to the same rules? I mean, I understand the medical side, you need to have a card, but will they work under the same board? You know, since it's still cannabis, you know, will it be like more potent, less potent? Is it a standard for it? Okay. Next, saturation. The number of stores, retail stores, the neighborhoods. Again, I come from rough neighborhoods, but we found in our neighborhoods liquor stores all the time. No saturation problem there, you know. But now the cannabis is legal. The talk is, okay, we don't want but so many in this neighborhood, so many in that neighborhood. I understand competition-wise, but in a marketplace, fair marketplace, if I got good product, the dude across the street don't, he's lost, basically. So as far as saturation goes, it's a fair market. I think, you know, stores can compete. And if you don't compete, you don't have to lose your license, but you can find a place where you can compete. Representative Adams on limits and shops. Again, good question, because 30% tax versus what the ABC pay is kind of crazy. But other states, they do have high taxes, you know. Also, do we want to criminalize it at a certain limit? The whole point of decriminalizing it is to decriminalize it. So if we're going to say, okay, if you got a pound of weed, you're going to get a felony, it doesn't make sense to say it's decriminalized. I'm sure you guys can come up with a fair solution, but I just wanted to put that out there. I'm working on time, people, so. Another thing, seeds. Right now, you can't buy and sell seeds. A good thing for you guys to look at is some kind of program where people who do want to do home cultivation, there can be like a seed depot where you can be allowed the 4 seeds you need to grow, you know, since they can't buy them. And illegal markets, they still sell moonshine. I mean, product pricing, that's another thing. As far as the legal markets go, the reason they're going to be illegal is because of pricing. Because of the taxes in the store, You know, they'll sell a certain amount of gram in the store, you're gonna get taxed on it, 30%. You come out here to meet the little kid on the corner, he got the same gram for $8. I mean, the advantages of going in the store is choices. You know what you're getting. With concentrates, you know it's quality, you're not dealing with street level. I understand, but with flour, that'll be the issue. My solution is pricing, control the pricing. You know, I know I want to get into the cultivation side of it, and I know the quality of the marijuana or the cannabis would differ, so it will be different prices. I'm not a big fan of regulation because I believe in fair market, and you know, you make a product, you should be able to sell it at your price, but you still want to control how much of it is on the street. So you want to kind of be right there to offset the guy on the street. So if he do want to sell it on the street, he losing money. You know, if I'm selling something on the street and I'm losing money, but I'm not gonna sell on the street no more.
If you can sum up your statement.
Oh, okay. Craft markets, small farmers that want to get into net. You know, like I'm at home, I want to open up a little shop where I serve food, cook, bake goods, stuff like that. Licenses for them. That's just an idea. A way for the small guy that probably can't get the social equity, but he has brilliant ideas, and he just want to do something small for his community, you know. And that wraps it up. That's pretty
Thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
Are there any other members of the public who'd like to comment at today's meeting? Yes, sir. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Michael Krowitz. I'm a disabled U.S. Air Force veteran. I'm from southwestern Ironto, Virginia. I'm Executive Director of Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access, and we're a partner nationally with the Veterans Action Council. I've been working on cannabis policy and working towards the day when we'll have meetings like this for about 25 years. So it really is quite an honor to be here, and I'm quite happy to be here with y'all. I am on the council of the Virginia Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council, and I look forward to the work of that council. I haven't heard anything yet, so for those behind me hearing me, I'm looking forward to emails and getting started and ready to roll up my sleeves. And I'm particularly looking forward to educational component of how we educate everyone throughout the state. And I just want to put, my name out there for you all as a reference and a resource to help you work through this. There's a lot of information that we've gleaned from the hundreds and hundreds of books on my shelf, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds and hundreds of books that you can benefit from. So we actually, together with our partner VAMJ, handed out about 20,000 or so seeds on the first day of legalization in Virginia. I'm very happy and pleased that that went well. No hassles or problems of any kind. We erred on the side of giving people 6 seeds so that they could get 4 viable plants. And I just want people to think about if they've ever had a foray into growing something in their garden, if I only gave you 4 seeds or 6 seeds, having a bigger plant number for the average citizen is going to help a lot. We're certainly supportive of that, and we're supportive of, especially from the veterans' perspective, we're looking towards community grow and community ability to take care of those that aren't able to grow on their own, who live in apartments, who live in shared space. I would highlight veterans who are in federal housing, where you're not going to be able to grow, even if you can keep it out of sight. So that shared ability is one thing we're looking at, and certainly raising the plant count to a reasonable amount for an individual to grow, and looking at the tax in a practical way. I think we're all in consensus, no matter where you are in cannabis, that we want this to eliminate what we're calling the traditional or black market as much as possible, and engage those in lawful activity as much as possible, working forward. So that's our goal. I think that's a shared goal, And I'm looking forward to getting involved in any capacity that we can towards that. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Krawitz. And thank you for your service. Are there others? Yes, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. My name is Vicki Williams Collins, and I am honored to be appointed to the inaugural Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board. The reason why I came up here this afternoon is two things. One, we don't have to reinvent the wheel when we're putting these processes and procedures in place. There are a lot of states have done a lot of good things. There are a lot of states that have done a lot of bad things. I am very hopeful that you move the date up to give people an opportunity. I think someone had also spoken about the illegal market. And how people want to buy seeds, want to get seeds. That's something that we need to think about moving up as quickly as possible. Additionally, the JLARC study, they mentioned about training police officers to recognize and be mindful of drug driving. I also would like to reiterate to the committee is that we also train our police officers to be mindful about the laws, the changes that have been put in place. Because what happens a lot, I think it goes into a power component. People are in an oversight position, and so they forget about what they have been doing for years as experience. So when you speak to ensuring that our police officers recognize drug driving, I really am hopeful that we also speak to ensuring that our police officers recognize when it is not time to arrest. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Thank you. Okay. I'll just, unless there are other members of the public, okay, please come forward.
Hi, Chairman, Madam Vice Chair. My name is Mike Sauer. I am a Virginia resident, and I am planning an educational event that will take place in the Commonwealth toward the end of August that is geared toward educating the community on safely growing and growing within the confines of the current law as it exists. Sitting here today, I guess I can back it up a step and give you a little bit about my background. I've been involved in the industrial hemp industry for the last 3 years. I've been a grower, and in the first year, I was solely a grower. In the second year, I partnered with another company where we grew and also processed hemp and made distillates, derivatives, as well as a large-scale indoor growing operation. This being the third year, I'm back farming at my own farm, and that's where I am today. But to give you, that's just kind of some of my background, is in the hemp market. And I heard some comments made, during the JLARC presentation about, we didn't really talk to the hemp industry about that. We didn't really engage the hemp industry on that. And I think that the hemp industry really has a lot to offer. When we talk about trying to expedite things, and trying to jumpstart things, I think we've done a lot of this in the hemp industry. We've already, I've really spent the last 3 years perfecting, my standard operating procedures on how to grow the plant successfully, in outdoor conditions. We've had 3 years to kind of perfect these techniques. We know what made sense in the legislation and what didn't make sense in the legislation for from a hemp processing and hemp growers perspective. And I think we can add that value, to this process, and we can help if we engage the hemp industry and learn from, some of the things that we've learned there over the last 3 years. The other one thing that really kind of stood out to me, in the presentation was the legal limits and where we reach the point of it being a criminal offense. I am a firm believer in just freedom when it comes to this particular plant. I know that's not where we are. To me, it's just a tomato. But having said that, this is where we are. We're talking about penalties for upwards of 16 ounces, and those becoming felonies. I think that anything with regard to this plant, so long as there isn't a victim in the crime or something egregious that happens, I just don't see where felonies have any place in the realm of cannabis and cannabis penalties. And that's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for being here. Good luck with your educational event, and please feel free to submit comments from the industrial hemp perspective to our website. Were there any other members of the public who had a comment for today? Okay. Before we conclude, I'll just mention again that we'll be accepting written public comment to committee operations at senate.virginia.gov, and that the administration has a website that's online now on the state of current cannabis law in Virginia, which is cannabis.virginia.gov. So unless there's other business from members of the committee, okay, the committee will rise.